Hey guys, back from another lockdown and here to review the Wilson Blade 98 version 8 16x19. In this video I'll give you my thoughts on the frame and compare it to the V7 and the V6 without Countervail, and at the time of this video all three rackets should still be available. The V7 should be on sale everywhere and V6 is still available at Tennis Warehouse or Tennis Only in Australia. Just for the sake of the video, I'll be referring to the V6 without Countervail as the V6 due to the paint job, even though it's basically the V5 from 2015. If you do like the video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing, as it does take a long time. You can also follow me on Instagram in my link below. So, according to the average specs listed by Tennis Warehouse, the Blade V8 comes in at 98 square inch head size, a 16-19 pattern with an 18-20 variant, an unstrung weight of 305 grams, a strong weight of roughly 320 grams, a balance point of 5 points headlight or 32.5 centimeters, a rounded frame shape referred to as a D-beam, only being 21 millimeters in width, and a stiffness rating of 61 RA. Not sure if anyone has noticed, but the Blade V8 actually does come foam filled in the handle, which probably helps with the dampening a little bit. So what's changed exactly with the blades over these three generations? The V6 was a lot stiffer and crisper feeling, with more power and spin capabilities built with control. The V7 went in the opposite direction, aiming to be more touch and feel orientated, reducing a lot of the stiffness and adding a higher average swing weight but a more muted response. The V8 now is slightly stiffer than the V7, but on average the swing weight has greatly reduced and is a lot more direct in response than the V7, but still more comfortable than the V6. For this review, I tried it in stock form and a few other weight variations to find out what suited me the best. My stock blade came in only at 298 grams unstrung. The balance was 32 centimeters or roughly 7 points headlight. With the strings added, they brought it to a strong weight of around 313 grams and 32.5 centimeter balance. Adding a Wilson overgrip brought it up another 5 grams to 318 grams, and the swing weight was very low at 310. I tested both in my own stock form as well as I tried weighting it up just a bit to get it closer to the TW specs to give you more of an accurate idea of how it was meant to play versus my own experience with the racket that I received. For my string setups and modifications, I used Solinka Confidential 1.2mm and Diadem Solstice Power 1.2mm, both at 48 pounds. My stock form swing weight, as mentioned, was 310, with Mod 1 bringing it up to 318 for an average TW spec range, Mod 2 being 323 and Mod 3 being 329. If you want to see exactly how I spec them, check out the overlay information and pause it if you need. So for feel and stiffness for the V8, I think this is still a very comfortable racket. The changes that were made definitely look like they firmed up the frame, especially when making impact with the ball. The difference with the V7 is that when you felt the racket flex, the racket felt like it bent as much as the ball was being pocketed, which I think contributed to the muted feel and delayed response. So I wasn't particularly a fan of how the V7 felt as others might have been. With the V6 without Countervail, it has a very direct feel, the ball comes off very fast, and you really notice how solid the overall frame is. When you make contact with the V8, the frame stays firm through impact, but the ball pocketing is enhanced and now there is a lot less of that major flex coming from the racket. Personally, I think this is a good change. Some people dislike the extra stiffness, but it's not stiff like it's reverting back to the V6. It's just providing a more direct and crisp response in my opinion. However, oddly enough, when you begin to weight up the racket more and more, it becomes a little more in tune with the V7, and especially if the string tension is low, say around the low 40s, or if your strings become very broken in and loose, it can actually feel very close to the V7, near identical. But you do have to lessen the tension quite a bit for that to happen and weight up the racket so you get that stability as well. But in general, for feel, I would give the V8 a nod over the V7, and the V6 is equally just as enjoyable, but will be liked by those who prefer a firmer and direct response as a personal preference. For control, what I feel the V8 has done better is dial in the level of control for accuracy, and I mentioned in my other reviews for the V7 blade that there could be a very inconsistent string bed at times, and the ball could just completely launch off the racket. I think with the V8 they've fixed that issue, and the launch angle is much more controllable and consistent, but also noticeably lower. It also may be a byproduct of the fact that it has less power and spin capabilities, but the overall theme of this racket seems to be directed towards more control and feel than anything else. This however also does place a negative impact on the depth control, as it seems that you'll need to swing quite heavy and consistent to maintain solid depth. So whilst accuracy has improved, launch angle in my opinion has been fixed, the depth has also suffered at its expense, likely from the decreased power. I think the Blade V8 has moved into more of a category of the current Pro Staff 97 and the Ultra Pro 16x19, where it's based purely on feel and control, and most performance capabilities are based on the skill of the user. And given the average lower swing weight across the board, it's become more of a platform racket than something that you would use off the shelf. It definitely needs to have some kind of customization unless you end up buying one with a pre-measured spec that is higher than it's supposed to be. With power, hands down, it goes to the V6. Just judging by some of these clips alone you can see in the video, just watch how much more penetrating the same shots that I perform are with the V6 compared to the other rackets. The swing weight is only around 325 and has no modifications and are a lot more powerful than both rackets that have a higher swing weight and a higher static weight. The V7's power comes from a heavier swing weight, and most of the V7s in stock form come in quite a higher swing weight in general. The V8 absolutely needs some form of customization, but even with the added lead bringing the swing weight into a range of my other two blades, there's still less noticeable penetration and plow coming from the racket. If I were to rank maneuverability based on performance potential of the racket, I would put the V6 first, the V7 second, and the V8 last. And it might seem a bit odd and you might disagree with my notion, considering the overall average swing weight has been lowered for the V8, which should help with user friendliness. However, the overall light package in stock form is affecting its performance capabilities without having modifications. And if you compare them to the V6 and V7 without any added weight, they can basically be taken from the shelf and played at a high level without needing to touch the racket at all. And when you are adding weight to the V8, you still have to work harder with every swing than previous generations. Now obviously that summary is comparing it to other previous generation blades, but the V8 is still the shape of a traditional blade. There's been no changes, so overall the maneuverability compared to other competing frames still works in its favor. I find no issues with the forehand and especially serving, and for a one-hand backhand it's only very specific ball scenarios that I find myself a little bit late to get around, which is typically the ones that are moving towards you and you're getting into a cramped position. With blades in general, they have a fairly closed 16x19 pattern with 8 mains in the throat of the racket, so they aren't going to provide you with outright massive spin potential, obviously compared to other rackets that are stiff and open patterned. The V6 with the extra stiffness will provide you the most spin and control combined together, which is pretty typical from a firmer racket. The V7 has decent spin potential, but this is somewhat masked by its very high launch angle, which adds to the illusion of tons of spin since the trajectory of the ball bounces higher regardless. However, if you do really want to take a swipe from underneath, I think the high launch angle can tend to take over and you may be in risk of overshooting more balls than you like. The V8 has the least amount of free spin. It's more of a self-generating type racket, as I mentioned, with both spin and power. It doesn't do anything special, but I think for advanced users it's not really an issue with a full blown out swing and good technique, but if you're intermediate where you still find yourself arming the ball a little bit more than you like, you might find yourself struggling a lot more with the Blade V8. For slice, I would say that the V8 was not particularly special. The lack of weight did not do it any justice, but even with additional weight added, it didn't carve through the ball particularly well, even with spin strings. It did better than the V7 as I thought it was more consistent off the string bed, but because the swing weight in stock form is generally lower and the V7 is a little bit more powerful and stable, the V7 still did a better job at penetrating the court with slice and depth when you hit it perfectly. As for the V6, it was by far the best with the slice. The combination of the stiffness and swing weight felt extremely stable throughout contact. It made it both very enjoyable and easy to knife right through the ball, closer resembling a more closed string pattern. As I've mentioned in previous reviews, serves has always been a highlight for all versions of the blade for me. Its shape I feel is very aerodynamic and normally it has a very solid swing weight that plows through the ball. The V8 does slightly suffer from its decreased power, but flat and accurate serves generally do hit the mark quite well. However, my go-to slicers were not as effective as other rackets that I've played with. It may be due to similar reasons as what I mentioned with the slice. just lacking its ability to grab the ball effectively, and also with kick serves I put it in the range of not terrible, but definitely no free added spin. The V6 and V7 both have very penetrating flat serves. The V6 is more versatile with spin capabilities, whereas the V7, the launch angle can be a little bit harder to control on kick serves, but definitely still a massive weapon for flat serves. All the blades are typically quite forgiving rackets when you are stacking them against other high intermediate to advanced frames. If you come from something like a Babolat, Speed or V-Core, you might have some struggles transitioning at first with the differences in power and spin, especially with the V8. But as I continue to say, the blade is the best racket to refine your technique if you've never used rackets that are slightly more control orientated and less powerful. The thing with the V8 is that it aligns its performance characteristics a little bit more to the Pro Stuff and Ultra Pro, but it's more forgiving in terms of the sweet spot size and easier to use compared to them. So if you're truly for improving your game, any blade, whether the V6, V7 or V8, will absolutely begin to expose some of your technical flaws, teach you how to play looser, use more weight transfer, and introduce you to the world of touch, feel and consistency instead of power and spin. In stock form, the V8 does obviously lack in stability given that the frame is still quite thin. Obviously mine coming in under spec was no help, and adding weight to bring it up to more stock like specs was still only marginally better. I needed to add a fair amount to bump it up towards the high 320s for it to feel closer to the V7 in terms of stability, but with it modified and a similar spec to a stock V7, I still think it had slightly less stability. I could still feel the racket twist in my hands when I went for bigger cuts of topspin, or when I try to pick up very speedy shots with half swings. There's not enough base behind it to block and letting it do the work for you. You really need to pay attention to making solid contact. Depending on what your swing weight is, the V8 in stock form will flutter on its stability for volleys, but as you increase the overall static and swing weight, I think it combines an improved touch and feel. The aerodynamic beam has always been a great help at the net to get the frame around, but normally having a bit of a head heavier balance than normal. The V6 and V7 are essentially the same in terms of volleying, but the touch and feel is where it differs the most. The V7 is not as enjoyable in my opinion, as there's not enough feel on the string bed, and sometimes it can be difficult to tell how much you need to put on a ball into a touch shot like a drop volley or drop shot. The V6 on the other hand feels very solid and a great volley racket. If you add a little bit of weight to bring up some of the mass behind the stability, it really lends itself to create a very versatile racket. The blade has kind of lost its original identity and turned into a racket that plays similar to many other control frames on the market at the moment. Not to say it's a good or bad thing, but I think original fans of the older blades will probably dislike the direction it's currently going. But there are some that are happily converting for the decreased stiffness, and there are new users who enjoy it for what it is. The benefits of the V8 compared to the V7 mostly exists around feel, which is obviously a very subjective topic, so if you're keen but not sure, try it before you buy it. My summary is that launch angle, control, and feel have improved, power, stability, and user friendliness have decreased. Personally, I think the racket has now become even more advanced player orientated than before with its current characteristics, even though the changes are slight. Are the differences between the V7 and V8 worth switching for? I'd say no. The V7 can be used just as effective as the V8 as long as you prefer the feel or don't mind the more muted response. I would recommend the V8 to anyone who wants more control-orientated racket to switch to from their current one. Intermediate users will find they will likely need to add at least a little bit of weight to help with stability, which you may be a bit out of luck if you don't like messing around with lead tape. If that's the case and you are keen on buying a Blade V8, I would ask for an over-spec'd racket that you'll need to get pre-measured when buying brand new, with a swing weight of at least 325, and that would ensure your racket is almost ready to go off the shelf. Finally, the V6 is still one of the best overall rackets to get as a blade. Just remember, this is the one without Countervail, so the one with Countervail was basically the same playing characteristics but a lot more muted. It has a bit of everything with power, spin, control, stability, kind of does it all, and at a medium level of stiffness. But that stiffness may not be suited to you if you have any pre-existing injuries to your wrist or elbow. But still, in my opinion, one of the best rackets out there to use in terms of overall playability. That concludes my comparison review of the blades. Stick around for the final scores of each racket. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.